Good morning. Good Christmas Eve morning. 24th of December. See it. So it's about 20 past 8 here in England. And for whatever Christmas Day means to you, we're almost upon it. So I have recently been thinking, or this week been thinking about the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew, as recorded in Matthew chapter 1 and the first probably 13 or 14 verses, which we're going to look at now. So, first of all, I say best day for every day. Every day has the fullness of life. So in some senses, today or any other day is no better than any day. So best day, Christmas Eve, best day for Christmas Day, best for the holidays, Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year, best life. So the idea is best for everything. Anyway, we better get on with this. But I thought perhaps I'd start, given that it is Christmas Eve, with one verse of Silent Night. And then, if I remember, I'll say it at the end. But I don't know how much. Well, we'll see how the time goes. You can't keep the people here forever, right? So let's look at Silent Night. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon virgin mother and child, holy infant so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. We'll come back to that if I remember at the end, to the last verse that I can see anyway. So I'm looking at, and this story is called It's Christmas Eve, a good time to look again at the genealogy of Jesus. So the first 16 verses of the book of Matthew outline the genealogy of Jesus. A quick search of Google will get you the book of Matthew. Just be aware there's different translations. They're usually the same, but as we'll see, there are sometimes confusing translations, or translations confuse each other. So, verse 1 introduces us to the genealogy, and the quotations that I'm using largely are from the King James Version of Matthew. So the first verse: the book of this generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So remember, Jesus is an anglicized translation of the Aramaic name Isho. I pronounce it as Yeshua, but that's now how Aramaic speakers pronounce it. It's more like Ishu, maybe Ishu. Again, feel free to comment. And Christ is the translation of the Greek for anointed one. Just in case somebody may have thought Christ was Jesus' surname. It's interesting that the son of David comes before the son of Abraham. And that's probably due to him being of the tribe of Judah, therefore a Jew, and David was the legendary king of the Jews. So who was Abraham? Well, Abraham was well before David. Abraham was the one that God chose to be the father of what became the people of Israel. So you could, well, I think you can say Abraham wasn't Jewish. Abraham was Abraham, from, it says, the Ur of the Chaldees, which I believe is modern day Iraq. So Abraham has a son, Isaac, born when both Abraham and his wife Sarah were well old. Sarah had no previous children and no further children. Hence, Isaac is referred to as the son of promise. The account of Abraham's life begins in Genesis, which is the first book of the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament, and that's in chapter 11, verse 27. His name begins as Abram, so you will be in the right place if initially confused, because you think, I thought he said his name was Abraham, but it's Abram. Well, things change. He goes from Abram to Abraham. So the second verse, Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judas and his brethren. So each of these characters has stories which we can read largely in Genesis. Isaac in chapter 21, Jacob in chapter 25. And I say this as those who initially read or heard the genealogy would have known the names and their stories. So Isaac has twins, Esau and Jacob. And Jacob is a second born twin, but he steals his brother's inheritance, which we read about in chapters 27 of Genesis. These stories are very full stories, but I'm only giving you a skimming over it, like a menu. And please look into them because they're great stories. Jacob had 12 sons, Judas being one of them. So the King James Version translates as Judas, whereas other versions translate as Judah, which is what we would, I think most people would probably know Judah. So it's interesting that King James doesn't quite get it as we know it. And that's Genesis chapter 9. So Judah was one of Jacob's 12 sons, who became one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And Judah, although Judah was not the firstborn of Jacob, but as Jesus was from his tribe, I suppose that's the reason he's mentioned. So verse 3, and Judas began Perez and Zara of Thamar, and Perez begat Esrom, and Esrom begat Aram. So who are these people? I've read them, but who are they? So we do have translation issues, as Perez is Perez, whose mother was Tamar. Another interesting story in Genesis 38. Just waving at my daughter to say, don't come in. I'm going to have to say, make sure you close the door, Tay. So who was Esron? The translators don't make it easy, as Esrom is Hezron, Genesis 46. Aram is also translated as Ram. So here we move between books where he's mentioned in the book of Ruth, chapter 4:19, and also in the first book of Chronicles, chapter 2, verse 9. So then we go on to verse 4. Are you still with me? I mean, these genealogies can feel tedious, but actually for me looking at this, it brings it alive by digging in, but you do have to stop and dig. And Aram begat Amadab. So no doubt somebody will comment on my pronunciation. And Amadab began Nason, and Nason begat Salmon. I didn't know any significance of these characters other than they are in the line until I looked in Wikipedia, and in Wikipedia we find that Amadab was the father of Nahshon, who was the chief of the tribe of Judah, which is in the book of Numbers, chapter 1:7, and there's other references. I'll try and put what I'm saying below in the video. And his daughter-in-law was Elisheva, who was Aaron's wife, as recorded in the book of Exodus, chapter 6:23, which makes him Aaron's father-in-law. And then you'd be thinking, if you don't know who's Aaron, well, that's another story. Brings us to verse 5. And Salmon begat Booz of Rachab, and Booz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed began Jesse. Again, it looks like the King James isn't the best translation for these names, because Booz is Boaz. I think most of us would know him as Boaz, and Rachab is Rahab. So Rahab's story is recorded in the book of Joshua, chapter 2, and she isn't a person of Israel, but she assists the spies when they go to Jericho, and her life is saved when Israel conquers Canaan. Again, you have to dig in, go back to the stories, great stories, but no time right now. So then she has a son, Boaz, and his story is in the book of Ruth. Ruth was also an outsider, but she marries Boaz, from whom Obed is born, and who is then the father of Jesse. So verse 6 reveals the significance of Jesse. And Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon, of her that had been the wife of Urias. So King David is Jesse's son. Again, many stories of David. It's curious that the translation states, David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Urias. So who was the wife of Urias? The wife of Urias was Bathsheba, and in chapter 11 of the second book of Samuel, you'll read the story of how David lusted after Bathsheba and took him for himself. Lots of twists in this story. He gets her husband killed in order to have her. Yeah, anyway. Verse 7, and Solomon begat Roab, and Roab begat Abiah, and Abiah begat Asa. So what we have from David to Rehoboam is a succession of the kings of Judah. And this succession of kings continues from verse 8 to 11. So to recap, David was the third king of Israel, the first being Saul, and the second was Saul's son Ishbosheth. The fourth was Solomon. The fifth was Rehoboam, also known as Rehoboam. Am I saying this right? Rehoboam is the last king of the United Kingdom of Israel. Thereafter is a split resulting in the northern kingdom and the kingdom of Judah. So what you have, if you didn't know, is there's a united Israel under one king, Saul, Ishbosheth, David, and Solomon. No, so in reading my own writings, it was the fifth king, so Solomon's son Rehoboam, who was the last king of the United Kingdom. Then they split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, which Jerusalem was the capital of Judah and is Judea, where the word Jew comes from. The northern kingdom were the other 10 tribes. They had their own kings. There's a lineage there. Some people would say, I kind of said that they may well be the Samaritans, and the Samaritans are still Samaritans in Samaria. So if we continue the line, the sixth king following the line of Judah was Abiah, and the seventh was Asa, and then we have Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Ammon, Josiah, Jehoiam, and again, feel free to comment on my pronunciations. It is said elsewhere that Jehoiam was the 19th king of Judah, so we have 2 missing kings from Matthew's genealogy, unless I've gone wrong somewhere. But again, I think that shows up. There's a genealogy, I think, in Luke. You have to ask the question, what's the purpose of the genealogy? Why is it there? What's the writer trying to do? Is it totally accurate? Perhaps in part, but then I guess like any genealogy, you have to kind of piece it together. So then in verse 12 we have Shealtiel, who's Jehoiam's child, but now Judah is in exile in Babylon. So the Babylonians come and they sack Jerusalem and Judea, and they take a lot of the Jews to Babylon, and they're in exile, so no more kings. So in verse 13 we have Zerubbabel, Abiam, Eliakim, Azor, who although not kings due to the captivity of Judah, are children of the former house of David. So verses 14 to 16 we have Sadak, Akim, Elium, Eleazar, Matham, Jacob, who was the grandfather of Jesus, and then Joseph, Jesus' earthly father. There are no Hebrew Bible references from those last, from 14 to 16, who are Sadak and Jesus' father, as the Hebrew Bible was complete and was circulating, I say, based on what I've read and seen, about 700 years before Jesus. So in conclusion, I have read this passage many times, as no doubt some of you, over my life, and never looked at it as I've just looked at it. And what I see in it is an attempt to bridge Jesus' life with that of the Jewish people and the Hebrew Bible, and even you could go back further to Abraham, who was before the Jewish people as such. Also, I see that if you were to pause at the significant names and read their stories, I've given you some references there that you go and look at, you get an overview of who was Jesus and the story before he appeared. So I don't know how many minutes that's taken, but I'm going to go quickly to Silent Night, the second verse, and then we'll close. So have yourself a good day, and thanks for everything. If that makes sense to you, it'll make sense to you. So, final verse. Silent night, holy night, shepherds quake at the sight, glory stream from heaven afar. Well, that's not good. Glory stream from heaven afar. Heavenly hosts sing hallelujah. Christ the Saviour is born. Christ the Saviour is born. Have a great Christmas.